Ready to light that fire by doing the things that make you come alive? Welcome to Health Raisers, a podcast for wise women. I'm your host, Dr. Nadine. I left a soul-crushing medical career full of bad news and evolved into a joyful health integration coach, helping hundreds of women find their healthy. You're more than your dress size. Stop putting up with toxic relationships, swallowing your true emotions, and sacrificing your mental health. Stop using your body as a battlefield. You're always giving. You deserve to put yourself first, not just for your sake, but for those you love. Wise women, let's make ourselves a priority right now. It's time to raise some health together. This year on Health Raisers, we are talking about healthy relationships. This episode is a re-release from my previous podcast, the Yogi MD podcast. My guest is Steve Ritter, CEO of Team Clock Institute, author, leadership coach, and workplace culture consultant. We explore his book, The 4 Stages of a Team, How Teams Thrive and What to Do When They Don't. You might think this is an episode about the workplace, but the principles apply to every team in our lives. Family, neighborhood, faith communities, book clubs, and more. We discuss how understanding team dynamics can strengthen all of our relationships. And stay tuned. Steve returns next month to discuss his new book, Living in Sync, How We Engage with the World, where we'll learn to better understand ourselves and how we interact with our environments to build healthier relationships. Please enjoy. So congratulations. I noticed your post this morning.
Well, yeah, I know. We are so lucky to not only have we had a third grandchild welcome to the world, but both of our daughters live within a mile of us. And so we get to see these little guys all the time.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that my daughters are 21 and almost 19. And one of the things that my eldest daughter was the first grandchild. And
Yes.
One of the things that my parents told me after her arrival, and they waited a little bit before they told me this, but they said that there's absolutely nothing like being a grandparent. Nothing.
You know, it is true, and it's way better than you think it's going to be. And for a couple of reasons. One is that the relationship you end up having with your grandkids is so much different than the relationship you have with your children, because you see generations of people kind of cascading down into them, and then you get to see your children become parents. But the thing that I think I like most is that when you're with them, everything else in the universe melts away.
That's what I hear. I don't think that people think of being healthy and being well outside of themselves as an individual, and more specifically, only thinking about things like, do I eat the correct things, or do I get enough sleep, or do I exercise enough? You're not just an isolated individual. So what I've been wanting to do with this podcast is expand the idea of health and wellness to include your social sphere, the people with whom you surround yourself, very important. So we choose sometimes to spend time with people, but then there are other times where you don't have a choice, say in a marriage with your in-laws or in the workplace.
Exactly.
And so, well, we've been acquainted for years now through my husband, Kevin, but after following you for a while and reading your books, it was just very clear to me that we need to extend the idea of health into teams, our teams, but even more so to recognize that we are part of a team. I don't think people necessarily think about structuring their lives and their thoughts that way. And I think if you do that, then you're in a better position to enhance those relationships. So those are kind of the big reasons why I was so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. And I don't know that either you or I know anyone who's actually a hermit. Most of us, I mean, I've always looked at health and wellness through the lens of relationships. I don't know anyone who can't define 4 or 5. I think I use the word team and the word relationship interchangeably most of the time. I don't know any of us who aren't in 4 or 5 or 6 significant groups of people, whether that's a dyad or a triangle of people or a foursome or a small group or a large group or a faith community or the recreational softball team you play in on the weekends or the book club or your neighborhood. Each one of those, and if you get to what actually defines a team, the simplest, broadest way of thinking about that is 2 or more people who collaborate on a common goal. Well, that embraces a lot of things, whether that's you and Kevin or Nancy and I and how we raise our children or our grandchildren, or whether that's your workplace, or whether that's your neighborhood. And as you say, not everyone that you're interacting with is easy to be with or to talk to. Some people fuel you and some people drain you, and some people are emotionally healthier and some people are emotionally not as healthy. And that's kind of been the fuel for my career is I've always been fascinated by the odd chemistry of relationships. And, what is the role of joy and what is the role of struggle and how is it that people navigate through things? It just has a fascination for me, which led a long time ago to trying to have a model that made sense to understand the complexity of relationships and teams in as simple of a way as was possible to understand.
So this is what led you to identify a problem that you wanted to solve when you thought about innovating the team clock methodology?
Well, when you think about innovation, it is an unsolved problem, and I certainly would not be as grandiose to suggest that I know how to solve relationship problems or team problems across the board. But I remember when I was in graduate school realizing that teams went through cycles, and that everyone struggles, that relationships and teams are complicated and conflict can be messy. And I wanted to create a model that would accommodate all the challenges and stuck points that teams experience and that relationships experience. And I wanted it to be simple to understand and simple to apply. And at the time, a buddy of mine who's a professional musician had moved from kind of rock to classical to jazz because he wanted to have a lifetime worth of things to work on, and he felt like he was kind of maxing out in the rock world. And he said to me that a lot in jazz hasn't advanced since Miles Davis in the mid-'60s. And I thought about that when it came to teams, and a lot in the way that we thought about teams hadn't advanced since Bruce Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, performing theory that came out of the mid-'60s. So here, it was the late 70s, early 80s in my early career, and I felt like 15 years had passed and no one was kind of going to the next level of thinking about relationship theory and thinking about team theory. And teams coming together and forming, then having some conflict and storming, and then setting some ground rules and norming, and then performing made sense only in a vacuum, that it was linear, and that so if you go from step A to B to C to D, and then you have a team, congratulations, worked good on paper, but not in actuality. And when I thought about the teams I was on and the relationships I was in, I couldn't think of one that followed that model cleanly. Some people skipped steps. When it was time to form ground rules and set norms, people would bake in unhealthy norms. People didn't like conflict, so they would avoid it. So problems would get more deeply rooted than they needed to be. And so I was looking for a model that would explain that, a one where you could move backwards or forwards, you could progress or you could regress. You could get stuck. You could choose to do something over again. You could skip a stage, and it would be able to reflect the way that relationships actually worked. And so what came into my head when I was 30 years old was a clock, because it's always cycling. It's perpetual, it's eternal, and each number on the clock would represent a stage of the team's development. And so I brought it to the head of the doctoral program at Loyola University, a guy named Randy Lucente, who was my favorite professor at the time. And I said, what do you think of this? And he looked at it and he said, it's got some overlap with standard relationship theory, but I don't know anyone who's drawn a model in a cycle like this. Mm-hmm. He said, so it makes sense, and keep working on it. And so I kept chipping away at it. And then, what happens when you have a model in your head is you start seeing the world through that lens and getting either validation or challenge to the way you're thinking about your model. And I kept getting validating experiences. Everything I saw, every time people struggled, every time people problem solved a struggle and had some kind of growth, it made sense in the context of the model. And so then, years passed, and after a fair amount of testing and experimentation with it, I finally got persuaded to write it and publish it and apply to the patent office for a trademark. And the first book came out 10 years ago now. It was a simple way to understand something that's extremely complex, that the chemistry of relationships and the chemistry of teams can be so complex and messy. And the model gave people a very, very simple way to understand, okay, we're in this stage now, so we're supposed to be frustrated. Or we're in this stage now, so we're supposed to be excited. Or it's supposed to be scary when you're taking a risk and trying something new. Or I'm supposed to be emotionally depleted when a change has happened. Okay, this is normal. I understand. So I go from here to somewhere next. And so I started seeing people adopt the model and apply it to their situations. And the rest is history.
Bringing you Health Raisers is possible because of these incredible sponsors. Feeling the need for a little pampering? Do you want an escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life? Mac Salon and Day Spa is your destination for relaxation and rejuvenation in Southwest Michigan. Get ready for a retreat in the woods. Mac offers comprehensive services tailored to your needs, including massage, facials, nails, waxing, and hair treatments, ensuring you feel refreshed and beautiful. Whether you're preparing for a special occasion or simply treating yourself, the experts at MAC are committed to helping you look and feel your best. Their commitment to wellness isn't just about beauty. It's about balance, confidence, and feeling amazing in your skin. Visit them today and discover why they're Southwest Michigan's premier choice for all your beauty needs. Looking for some time away from the chaos of everyday life? Step into the beauty of Fernwood Botanical Garden, where nature, peace, and renewal come together. Nestled along the scenic St. Joseph River Valley, in between Niles and Buchanan, Fernwood's 105 acres of lush gardens, quiet trails, and serene woodlands offer a sanctuary for replenishing your soul. Wander through vibrant landscapes, listen to the melodies of birds, and connect with nature at your own pace. Indoors, you'll find an inspiring art gallery, a lush fern conservatory, and a welcoming cafe, perfect for reflection and relaxation. At Fernwood, there's always something to discover, from engaging classes and special events to charming, verdant venues for your own gatherings. It's more than a destination, it's a feeling, a place to breathe, learn, and grow. Plan your visit today. Explore, discover, connect. In the mood for coffee, tea, yummy pastries, or cool swag? My friends at Infusco have got you covered. Infusco Coffee Roasters is a cozy neighborhood coffee joint in Sawyer and St. Joseph, Michigan. Infusco stands for a healthy community. They craft irresistible seasonal drinks, sourcing local artisans' products. The flavors shine from quality ingredients, and their beans are roasted on site. They do not hide behind tons of sugar. Every time I go, I'm greeted by my name with a smile. Bad service is just non-existent. It feels like stepping into a friend's living room. They keep it personal. Old school, eclectic coffee mugs on the wall, fun merch, including stickers designed by artists, t-shirts, and sweatshirts. It's the perfect place to get to know your neighbors and chat with tourists. You will always find people deep in conversation. Special events keep it fresh. Community, health, the heart of Sawyer. That's in Fusco. I hope to meet you there.
What I really like about the team clock methodology is, as you've said so eloquently, that change is cyclical. It allows us to be able to accept failures and or successes or challenges and try again, and to be able to have something objective to look at so that you can make progress.
Yeah. A lot of people use the term renewal. I always kind of think of it like you always get another chance at something. I think you read the first book, Team Clock. There was a page or two in there where I talked about a relationship with my son where he had become a teenager, and now the car rides to and from his piano lesson were no longer conversations. He had earbuds in and I had something on the radio, and we would drive for 20 minutes to his piano lessons and not be in communication. And I thought, this isn't the kind of relationship I wanted to have with anyone, and so I asked him to take out his earphones, and I turned off my radio, and I said, I know you're 17 now and that hanging out with your dad is not the most fun thing to do, but what does it look like now, and what's going to look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now? And can we keep redefining what attachment looks like and what collaboration looks like and what trust looks like as time goes on? And before we knew it, we had a different kind of cadence going in the car to and from the piano lessons that was much more reflective of a 17-year-old son of a 50-year-old father than it was a 30-year-old father with a 10-year-old son. And then so what it occurred to me is that, so he's going to grow up and go on to college and move away, and I'm going to lose him, but I'm actually not losing him. I'm also gaining an adult version of him, and I get to have a different kind of relationship with him that replaces the one that I'm losing. So the same thing would apply that if you screw something up, or if you make a mistake, or if you inadvertently make a decision that hurts somebody, you can repair things that are broken. You can learn from your mistake, and you can come around the next opportunity you have and improve on that theme. So the model, the visual model of it has increasingly large dots moving from the center, and it kind of concentric circles out. And the idea is that every time you go around the cycle, you can deepen the amount of investment that you have, and you can strengthen the amount of trust that you have, and you can get a little more daring in your innovation, and you can become more effective in the way that you manage change. And at the next time around the cycle, you're going to get a chance to deepen that even further than you did before. And so I had a question once during a presentation. Someone raised their hand and said, is it infinite? Is the visual model of the team clock infinite, that there's no end to your ability to invest more deeply in someone, or trust can grow eternally with someone, or there's not an exploration or a discovery that is too complicated to continue to be innovative even though you've already figured something out? Or can you get more resilient over time when you face adversity? And my answer was yes, it's infinite. You can always take it to a new level, whatever that happens to be. So interestingly, while most of the time when the phone rings in my office, it's for a team that is struggling in some way, that's looking to find the path to get well, sometimes the phone rings because somebody has done a good to great and they want to go great to greater, or they're saying, what's the relative weakness amongst all these strengths that would allow us to take this to the next level? And that's a much different kind of work. And a good marriage does the same thing, right? A good marriage doesn't just rest on the laurels of the fact that it's a strong relationship. It's constantly saying, how are we doing? Why do you ask? Because I want to make sure nothing takes root if we haven't talked about something. And, we're fine. All right. So how are we doing? I said, we were fine. Well, how are we doing? Since you asked, there's this. Oh, good. Oh, that again? Right. And so there's always a chance to keep things moving stronger and stronger moving forward. And so that's what the clock does. It's always midnight again, or it's always noon again, or it's always 3 p.m. again. It comes around and around and around. And shame on us if it's the same every time it comes around. The intention is to keep it growing and keep it moving and keep it evolving.
Can you please briefly describe what the numbers represent on the clock face?
I can. So, there's an easy way to look at it and there's a complicated way to look at it. So if you move around from 12 o'clock back to 12 o'clock again, so from the top of the clock, the 1 o'clock phase is what we call investment, which is, who is my team? Who are my leaders? What is the mission of this organization? What are the values of the organization? What is the vision? What are the goals? Are we all moving in the same direction? And to what degree am I bought into that? 2 o'clock, before you actually buy in, is usually some testing of that. So imagine that you're maybe in a new workplace or with a new team. Have you been oversold in some way? Is the leader really as, what he or she purported themselves to be? And so before people kind of buy in at 3 o'clock, they test a little bit. So 2 o'clock is testing. 3 o'clock is dependence or interdependence. And what that means is that we all in this relationship or in this group or in this team or in this organization are bought into the same things. And these are our values and these are our goals, and we're going to move with this together. We may have difference of opinion in the way that we achieve those goals, and we want that diversity of opinion because it's going to be fuel for innovation later. But the direction that we're heading and the way that we head there, we all agree on. And so that's what 3 o'clock is. And that includes the ability to navigate some differences and some conflict in the interest of embracing diversity as a strength of the team. So from there goes to 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock is a trust stage, and trust is made or broken by accountability. So you think about, in a typical day, we may have a dozen different small or large accountability trusts. So, for instance, we agreed to begin this call at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was on and you were on, and so we both strengthened trust in a small way at that point. And as you can imagine, there are big ways of blowing trust or strengthening trust as well, but it usually is accountability to the values and the mission and the direction of the team, and it's accountability to the norms of the way we treat each other, whether that's respect or whether that's professionalism, whatever it happens to be. 5 o'clock is cohesion. Cohesion is the bringing together of people who have built trust and who are moving toward the same goal. And this is the moment when every workplace ought to send out an employee satisfaction survey, because at 5 o'clock, everyone loves each other. Everyone feels tight. And it's a really good time to say, yeah, thumbs up, things are working well. 6 o'clock is that, we call it attachment, but it's some form of connectedness, some form of love. It's kind of the extreme version that we are one. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of teams think now, that's the forming, storming, norming, performing is 6 o'clock is starting to perform. But what has happened there is we brought ourselves together and created the foundation needed to really create growth and change, because a good, healthy team doesn't just achieve togetherness. It creates a foundation for growth and change. And so 7 o'clock is innovation. So what are we going to do with this? Whether it's the marriage and how it evolves, or whether it's the team or the organization and how it grows and evolves. And that usually means taking some level of risk. So 8 o'clock is risk, and 9 o'clock is independence. So independence is an interchangeable word for change. We've taken the foundation of what we all agreed on. We've surrounded it with trust and psychological safety and respect and cohesion. We've used that platform to innovate and take risks, and now we've created something new. And maybe that launches someone who was a leader in the organization to a new job, or maybe that creates a product that no one's ever used before, or maybe that is a breakthrough in medicine. Independence usually some problem solved through innovation, and then that requires responding to the change. So 10 o'clock we call distancing, and that's when you move away from from the way it used to be. You get a little perspective on it and brace yourself for the fact that you're going to go through what at 11 o'clock is a separation from people, from processes, from teams, whatever the change has brought, positive or negative, and then back to 12 o'clock, which is the loss phase. And then, as depleting as loss can be, it leads to a new investment phase at 1 o'clock all over again, to whatever your new circumstances are going to be. And so each of these numbers around the clock lives in a stage. And so the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock are in our investment stage generally. And 4, 5, and 6 are in our trust stage. And 7, 8, and 9 are in our innovation stage. And then 10, 11, and 12 o'clock are in our distancing stage. And so that's a much simpler way to look at the clock rather than to see it in 12 points that you have to keep moving through.
I see.
Like to look at it in these quadrants of stages.
Just in general, what are the characteristics of a healthy team versus that of an unhealthy one?
I love this question because everyone can relate this to the teams that they're on very quickly, right? And so and many of these are common sense, right? So let's kind of walk through them. So a healthy team has norms that support health, which is as simple as the way we treat each other, what it's like to be in this workplace, and kind of the way that this workplace does it. And so, like for instance, I have a lot of experience with some of the medical centers across the city. So the way Rush does things is different than the way UIC does things. It's different than the way University of Chicago does things. It's different than the way Loyola does things, or that Advocate Healthcare does things. These are all wonderful, amazing, world-renowned health centers, but the culture of these are all very, very different.
Vastly different.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the norms that, what it's like to work there. So, for instance, I spent 12 years of my career at Advocate Healthcare, and that it was a faith-based healthcare system. So what does it mean to work in a faith-based system? Affects every employee in that system. I've had clients in the UIC health system for about a decade. Well, UIC prides itself in serving the underserved populations of the city, so that makes a very different culture for working there as well. So norms would be one of the things that I would list, and I would then tie that to values that people need to feel aligned with the values. So that could be appreciation of diversity as a strength, or that could be the understanding that conflict is fuel for innovation later, and if it's done respectfully and professionally, it helps the team, it doesn't hurt the team. Those kinds of things, not just the values and vision around we seek to accomplish X with this team, but more about the things that we believe that we hold common with each other and moving forward, and are we all aligned with that? And so obviously an unhealthy team bakes in unhealthy norms where diversity isn't seen as a strength and change is considered a bad thing, and conflict is considered harmful to the team, not helpful to the team, or we aren't aligned with our visions or our values. That's kind of the unhealthy side of the ledger there. I probably would list productive management of conflict. The healthy teams tend to invite conflict and address it, and realize that it's healthy. It's a healthy part of struggle that helps people grow. I probably would list respect and trust as and accountability and psychological safety as non-negotiable ingredients of a healthy team. When people talk about being on unhealthy teams, those are often the first things they mention is I don't feel respected, or I don't feel trust, or there's not psychological safety in the workplace, or people aren't held accountable. And so that's the unhealthy side of the ledger, is when those things are absent. Connection. A lot of teams boast having a family-like culture. That's usually the presence or absence of connection in the workplace. The unhealthy side of that, it's really easy to fall into some version of an us and a them. And so, for instance, it could be veteran employees versus newer employees, or if there's been a merger or acquisition, it can be kind of the legacy people versus the acquired people coming in. That falling into some version of an us and them is really easy for teams to do, but feeling a part of something bigger than you that everybody's a part of, regardless of their role, is a sign of a healthy team. I would also list the willingness to explore and discover and be uncomfortable and fail as a way of supporting innovation as a healthy symptom of a team. And perhaps the other side of the ledger for an unhealthy team is kind of being cautious and being loyal to the status quo and resisting change in some way. And then on the note of change, healthy teams are resilient, and not just during normal circumstances, but especially during stressful circumstances. And so being resilient during periods of adversity is the real symptom of a healthy team.
And that relies upon having built a really solid foundation of trust.
Exactly. So there's your ledger, clear norms, professional management of conflict, mutual trust, a sense of being a part of something bigger than you, willingness to take some risks and try new things, being resilient during adversity. That's kind of the recipe.
Okay, so Team Clock was your first book, as you mentioned, about 10 years ago, and that's very concisely written, outlining the why of a team. And then the 4 Stages of Team, which is your recent publication, came out this year, discusses the how. And you really dive into case studies and specific examples of the 4 stages, as you mentioned before: investing, trusting, innovating, and distancing. In your experience, which stages do you find teams typically get stuck?
All of them, but for different reasons. So if you think about, so the first stage is investment, and that's that 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock place on the clock, where people are getting aligned with values and vision, and they are setting their norms, and they're learning how to have conflict in a professional way. That's an easy place to get stuck for 2 reasons. One, usually that phase follows a distancing stage where people are depleted from managing change, so the energy is low coming in. And secondly, learning how to manage conflict is a part of that stage, and usually that's frustrating for people. I kind of think about like when you're if you go horseback riding and the horse wants to run, but you have to saddle it up and get it ready to go, and it wants to leave. It's kind of like, well, before we can go build trust and be innovative and do all the things teams want to do, we have to build our infrastructure. What are our norms? What are our goals? What are our values? How are we going to manage our differences? And so you've got these really kind of interesting forces coming together that are both coming together of things and conflict in between them, and hard work at a time when we're kind of depleted emotionally from whatever change we've been through. So that's a reason to get stuck there. And that can be as simple as disagreement on direction, or disagreement on norms, or unprofessional way of managing conflict. That can make it hard for people to move on to the trust stage. The reason that people get stuck in the trust stage is because it's it's one of 2 reasons. Either it's so comfortable and it feels so good.
It does.
Why would you leave? Why would you sacrifice that to take a risk and go out on a limb and innovate when that's going to feel scary? The feelings that come from being in a respectful, safe, accountable environment, when people feel connected and the goal is moving forward that everyone agreed on, it's really hard to imagine that sacrificing that for something scary is a smart thing to do, but it's exactly what to do. It's exactly what allows people to grow. So people get stuck because they don't want to give that up. They don't want to sacrifice it. But the other reason that people get stuck is because in its absence, feeling disrespected, feeling unsafe makes it really difficult to move forward. So imagine, you've got a brilliant idea about how something maybe could be managed differently than it's being managed. But the last time you shared a brilliant idea, you were publicly humiliated by your boss, or you got a slap on the wrist. I had someone say to a colleague in a school one time, "You've not been here long enough to have an idea."
Oh, I'm not surprised.
And it shut her down immediately. She had brilliant ideas. The same thing happens to introverted people. The people who aren't the first to raise their hand because they want to think a little bit before they speak. Well, in any given workplace, if you have a table with 8 people sitting around it, 3 or 4 of those people are introverts. And they may have the best ideas, but they may be the last to speak up, particularly if the environment doesn't allow for the safety for them to have a different idea, or for them to speak up, or if they don't feel like they're a part of the group in the same way because they're more quiet than somebody else. And so people get stuck in this trust stage for both reasons. A, it's comfortable, or B, it's unsafe to move forward for some reason. And the moving forward is taking that platform of investment and trust and doing something a little daring, leveraging differences, taking smart risks, and being innovative. And that, by its nature, is scary. It's apprehensive. You're out on a limb. You're trying something that hasn't been tried before. You're solving a problem. And the reason people get stuck there is one of two things. They're either afraid, they're responding to fear, and maybe the amygdala of their brain is shouting out messages that something awful is going to happen if you move forward.
Sure.
Or there's insufficient trust to support leveraging differences, or maybe they built in unhealthy norms at the beginning that said having different opinions isn't something we do here, and so they keep things to themselves. And so, but generally, the reason people get stuck in innovation is because they're afraid of what would happen if they make change. And then the distancing phase is you've made change, but the differences that come from that are depleting to our energy. And so people get stuck there for a couple reasons. One, they're either emotionally and physically depleted from managing change, or they may not agree with the consequences of the change. If that means that the leader that they've always trusted is moving on to bigger and better things, and there's going to be a new leader coming in, they might not like that change. Or maybe it was their best friend or office mate that is leaving to take another opportunity that resulted from what they innovated. And so you see people at their best and worst during periods of change. And so the reason we use the term distancing is because sometimes it helps to step back a little bit and get a little bit of perspective on what's actually happening here and what our new circumstances are going to look like. And then you can kind of refuel and refocus and step back in and decide how you're going to be a part of whatever's next as you get around to the next investment phase. And most of us can do that stepping back and getting perspective when we're calm or when we're feeling okay. But when we're totally stressed or totally depleted, sometimes it's hard to get that perspective. So that's why we call that phase distancing rather than change or change management, because it's the stepping back and getting refueled and getting perspective that allows you to move forward.
I'd like to focus a little bit more on conflict resolution, because I feel like that is a very loaded area for a lot of potential to get stuck, whether conflict is invited or conflict is repressed. People typically respond to having a difficult boss by saying things like, well, I have to tolerate it because I need the money, so I just have a bad boss, and doesn't everyone have a bad boss? Or I'll just survive here in this workplace. And so I'm just going to do the minimum required to get through my 8 hours, and then I can come home after that and forget about it. Or it's intolerable and quit. So I know you've had plenty of experience with navigating broken team dynamics. So what would you say to that very typical scenario of a difficult boss situation?
Well, the easy out on this one is saying it depends. But here's what it depends on. It depends on, where you are in your career. Are you, fresh out of school and this is your first job? Are you mid-career? Are you late career? Is your financial situation require you to do something? And there's lots of variables in the equation that change from person to person. But, if you think in the perfect world, in the world of ideals, I would say no one should ever tolerate actively disengaged, toxic, broken people, whether they're a boss or a coworker. That people should only be in workplaces where they feel respected. That's just not reality. And so I think, like, one of the adages that they say in kind of career development is that when you're early in your career, you take the least sucky job, but get the best supervision and training and mentorship you possibly can. And you kind of hone your craft and try to build a network of really supportive people. And so for somebody who's maybe earlier in their career and they don't have the freedom to move, but they've got a bad situation, you kind of find the mentor or find the subgroup of people where there's kind of an insulation away from some of the other things. And you get what you can out of the situation until you have an opportunity, either through your own skill development or through your networking or whatever it happens to be, to better your situation. There's always something to be gained from a situation, whether it's a positive or a negative situation. And a lot of teams will insulate themselves. I worked on a team once that was amazing, but the leadership above us wasn't. And so many of us on the team didn't have the freedom to make an immediate move. So we made the small group culture into a good culture, even though the things that were happening above us were intolerable, until we had a situation later on that we could do something about it. So I think there are maneuvers that people make to learn to get the best out of a bad culture when they're in the place that they can't. I also remember a situation when I was a little later in my career where I said, this isn't okay. And this means a job hunt for me, because I'm not going to ever be in a situation again where somebody who is toxic or dysfunctional has the ability to make me miserable. And there's no amount of money or salary or benefits that I'm going to exchange for being miserable. And so, and sometimes in that situation, the freedom to go equals the freedom to stay. Once you've realized that this isn't what you're going to tolerate any longer, and that you have to make some kind of maneuver, whether that takes a week or a month or a year after that, you've given yourself the freedom to make some kind of a shift in your life. And it doesn't matter how immediate that is. In some ways, at that point, your employer is funding your job hunt, because you're doing enough to come in and do your job and get paid every 2 weeks. But you may not be bought into the culture of the place if it's become dysfunctional, or if it's hurting other people, or if it isn't aligned with your values. Then it's a matter of time before you find something that is. And oftentimes people who have that experience, it's a one-time experience. They say, I'm never going to be in a situation again where I allow someone to take advantage of me, or I'm not trusted, or it doesn't feel safe, or I've got that sinking feeling on Sunday night that I have to go to work the next day.
Yes.
That's something that I guess you can tolerate a little of that early in your career, but the further you get into your career, the more everyone ought to demand a culture of accountability. This is why companies like Glassdoor exist. Every business across the country gets a culture rating by Glassdoor. One of my kids worked for a company that had great culture ratings nationally, but happened to report to a manager who was awful. And so the internal, the 6 or 7 of them that worked in this part of the building was miserable, even though nationwide it was considered the greatest company to work for in the history of business. And so that required her to have to make a move at some point, even though the company culture was good. The company somehow didn't hold that manager accountable to being a good manager. Or maybe that manager needed to develop his or her skills in some way. So I guess what I'm saying is eventually you get to the point where you have to decide whether you want to normalize dysfunction and have that pain become part of your day-to-day work, because what we tolerate, we sanction. Or whether you're in a position to say, you know what, I'm either going to try and make some change internally here with whatever my platform is, depending on what my role is in the organization, or especially in this day and age where unemployment is so low and people are hungry to find talented people, maybe it's time to go shopping for a different situation. Yeah.
In your opinion, are there bad leaders?
There are bad leaders. Sometimes not intentionally, right? Sometimes leaders haven't developed their leadership skills yet.
What about a manager who has a dictatorial style?
Well, most of us wouldn't want to be in a social relationship like that. Most of us wouldn't want to be in a marriage like that. Most of us wouldn't want to have the captain of your soccer team act like that. Most of us wouldn't want to be treated in a domineering, controlling way in a workplace either. Now, I don't mean to be judgmental about people's mental health. There are some people who seek that out. They seek relationships with people who are controlling. I don't think that's healthy. And so
that's really interesting.
Why people end up in the relationships they end up with, it goes back to that kind of fascination of the odd chemistry that happens in relationships and teams. People don't always seek wellness. I remember one of the ethical conversations we had in social work graduate school was this notion of secondary gain, where they would pose the question, is it better to be healthy or sick? And everyone would raise their hand and say it's better to be healthy. And then the professor would say, oh, actually, it's better to be sick because there's way more secondary gain. People come and take care of you and they're worried about you and you get all sorts of attention that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. And it made us all think about the reasons that people choose unhealthy situations. And in some ways, toxic people seek toxic situations. And so if we come in and assist a team in getting to a better place, and there's been a subset of that team that have been dysfunctional and toxic to the workplace, and the culture has tolerated that and sanctioned that and allow that, but through intervention with our model has decided to have a culture with a stronger culture and more accountability, there's a problem for the folks who have been toxic and dysfunctional because they no longer have the air that they breathe. They no longer have the currency that they function by. If their wellness as humans is predicated on making other people feel weak, and the culture no longer allows for that, then they either have to find a different way to get their needs met, or they have to go to a workplace that allows them to hurt other people. Right. So, we assume that everyone wants to be healthy, and we assume that everyone wants a culture of workplaces. But there are, the Gallup organization has been measuring this for decades. 20% of most workplaces is what they call actively disengaged. These are people who are using their energy to hurt their coworkers and to hurt the workplace. And
mind-boggling.
It is, but you know who these people are. You've been in these workplaces as well, right?
Yes.
And you come from the medical field. I've spent a good share of my career in healthcare in the medical field as well. And so you think about, someone like you who maybe got a good MCAT score and got into a good medical school and got the best residency and the best fellowship. Some people do that by climbing over the backs of their peers, not by being collaborative.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Yeah. And I don't mean to cut you off, but that's a great segue. The culture has been that of at least when I was training, I don't know if things have changed. When I was going through, it was definitely, well, as you know, my husband was in the military. Yes. And when we were both in school and then going through our transitions, he in law school and I in medical school and residency and fellowship, there were so many parallels. I didn't grow up encouraged to think team. I grew up encouraged to think interacting with other people, it was competition because there were only so many slots. And so you had to be the best at, and you had to get the best grades at. Now, I wasn't one of those people who was actively engaged in harming others, hiding books and things.
But you knew how to, you knew how to win. You knew how to win. You know how to get the best residency.
You had to.
How to get the best fellowship. You know how to get into the best med school, right? And then you were asked to be a part of a multidisciplinary team where collaboration and communication.
And how on earth? How? When you were never taught that for so many years.
And when we go in and do a kind of a rigorous metric-based assessment of team effectiveness and team wellness, we frequently in groups like that get scores back that say there's an undercurrent of disrespect in the workplace.
Absolutely.
And that behavior that hurts the team is tolerated by leadership, and collaboration is low. And we've had people on medical faculties who are, internationally renowned for their brilliance and their discoveries and their technical skills, who don't play nice in the sandbox and are the people when situations get stressful, and that could be in an OR, aren't nice to other people, right? And so now in the OR or wherever you're practicing, the subject of the work is the patient's health, not whether you were disrespectful to the nurse who was trying to help you, or to the other doctor, or to the resident, or to somebody else. And so a lot of the bad behavior gets either sanctioned or forgiven in some way.
Well, because it's hazing. It's hazing because you have to prove that you deserve to be there still.
Exactly. Yeah, in nursing, they say nurses eat their young, right? And that you have to get through that gauntlet if you're going to make it in this profession. And so I think social work was the exception to that, because social work was always kind of these gentle, loving, humanistic people wanting to look at the rest of the world from a strengths-based perspective rather than a problem-based perspective. But your world and mine had been filled with people who are, brilliant and internationally renowned and do amazing things for the rest of humanity, but often aren't nice to each other in a professional circle. And what the Gallup organization has told us is that every workplace has about 20% of those folks. Now, the interesting thing is that when you become a workplace that says, well, we're not going to be that anymore, you can shrink that 20% down considerably. You can even get it down to zero. If everyone buys into a culture of accountability that doesn't say you can't behave poorly, it says that because we're human, we know that sometimes things are going to happen that we do that hurt each other, and then you fix that if you broke it, and that we don't let problems get roots and get deep tentacles into our culture. We are committed to growing relationships and collaboration and cultures that support and grow each other moving forward. And then what happens is that the folks who don't fit with that, you fear that there has to be some kind of a lengthy, time-intensive, resource-intensive human resources procedure to take care of them. But what often happens is that they leave themselves because the healthy environment no longer meets their unhealthy needs. So they have to go somewhere else to be mean to people or to make other people feel small or whatever it is their goal is.
Interesting. Can a culture be healthy where conflict is discouraged? So you're not allowed to express your frustrations. You are a guest here, and you have to prove that you deserve to be here. So you really have no right to express any frustrations. You should be lucky to be here.
Yeah. Well, there's a cost for that. So businesses and teams can achieve results in that culture, just not nearly as amazing as the results would be in a more collaborative, more inclusive culture. I talked to someone a week ago who said, all of those aspects on the ledger of healthy versus unhealthy teams, he says, we check off every single unhealthy one. Yet we make profit, we innovate things, and the answer is not at the level that you could if your norms were healthy. And so if the divorce rate is 50%, so 50% of the people that get married stay married, what percentage of those are healthy marriages? Maybe a small percentage, because a number of folks decide to live with unhealthy, dysfunctional norms. And what we tolerate, we sanction. And, because we're living things, we seek homeostasis. So living things seek sameness. Sameness doesn't have to be healthy. Sameness can be, let's not change the unhealthy thing that we do.
Wow. Once upon a time, in a medical setting, I had someone who was above me. This is pretty much a quote, say to me, I eat management's, so you have to eat mine.
Oh, my goodness. My guess is that somewhere along the line, that became one of the pieces of evidence that you made to say, I'm going to take my MD and I'm going to use it to help the world in a different way than colluding with something like this.
Now, I've finally been able to get to a point where I have no regrets. I'm the person I am because of my experiences, but I've seen some stuff.
Yeah,
definitely
exactly. Well, and I know, and that's when you and I met for the first time, was in the middle of all that stuff and in the middle of the transition that came from it. And the transition wasn't easy, but where you are now happened because of that, not in spite of that.
Anything else that I might have left out that you'd like to add?
Oh, boy, we could talk for a long time.
We really could. This has been spectacular.
Yeah.
I've learned so much.
Yeah, I guess, I think I've listened to some of your other podcasts and you always talk about what it means to be healthy. And I like the fact that that's more than just nutrition and exercise.
It certainly is. And so for you, what would that be?
Well, I always kind of think about it in terms of as many wellness domains as I can imagine. So let's just do a brain dump. So being disease-free is a wellness domain, and being fit and having good nutrition is a wellness domain. But also how you manage your career and your professional satisfaction is a wellness domain. And your friends and your social life and your interpersonal relationships and your love life are all wellness domains. There's probably financial wellness. There's probably cultural wellness. There's probably spiritual wellness, and the list goes on. So what the way I think about wellness is if there are multiple domains, whatever the list may be for you and differently for me, maybe there's a kind of a community, societal domain as well. At any given time, one or more of these domains might be off balance in a little way. And so I always like to think about doing a mini gap analysis of my own wellness periodically. How's my career? How are my finances? How's my fitness? How's my nutrition? How's my professional satisfaction? How are my friendships? How's my marriage? How's my faith community relationship? Do I understand my cultural roots? And at any given time, one or a few of those might be a little off and could use some attention. And so I've always referred to that as kind of a personal strategic plan, that if you have a overarching goal for what you're supposed to be doing in the world that's wellness oriented. So if my goal is to elevate others in some way, whether I do that as a husband or as a father or as a grandfather or as a neighbor or as a counselor or as a consultant or as a therapist, if my overarching goal is to elevate other people, there are certain strategic priorities that make that possible. And if I define that by wellness, that means I have to be medically well. That means I have to be professionally satisfied. That means I have to have good relationships and all of those other domains that we mentioned. And so if we are always kind of doing our own personal strategic plan and doing a gap analysis and paying attention to the one or two areas that might be a little off balance for one reason or another, then I think the kind of gestalt way of thinking about wellness gets served.
Thank you very, very much for that wonderful answer and your generous time and a lot of great information.
Well, thank you, Nadine. I really appreciate the conversation, what it sparked, the authenticity of it, and the history that we have together that allowed us to come into this conversation.
Wise women, move from last place to first place in your life. Stop using your body as a battlefield. Let's raise health together with a customized health plan just for you. Contact me at npkhealthintegration.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.